Hi, and welcome to the Becoming Trauma-Informed podcast, where we help you understand how your past painful experiences are affecting your current reality and how you can shift those so you can create your desired future. I'm Dr. Lee, and both myself and our team at the Institute for Trauma and Psychological Safety are excited to support you on your journey. We talk about all the things on this podcast. No topic gets left uncovered. So, extending a content warning to you before we get started. If you notice yourself getting activated while listening, invitation to take care of yourself and to pause, skip ahead a bit, or just check out another episode. Let's dive in. Hi, friends. Welcome to this week's episode. So let's just talk about how much I did not want to record this. Now, when I say that, I love my podcast. I normally love podcasting, and I'm reaching that time in my hormonal cycle that I don't want to do anything. And I used to make myself really wrong for that, and now, I recognize that sometimes we do things even when current us does not want to do them, because future us will be very grateful we did. And actually, the reason I shared that with you is because this fits in really perfectly with this third and final segment of this 3-part series that I've been doing on power and leadership and trust. So 2 weeks ago, we talked about self-trust and psychological safety and how important those are for being somebody who leads and being somebody who influences and is wielding their power from a aligned, trustworthy, safer space. And then last week we talked about what it looks like to really create your what you do and who you help statement if you are somebody going into thought leadership and you want people to understand how you're going to lead them. And we had a lovely guest, Deanna Tanner, on. And this week we're going to talk about power. I've been kind of hyper fixated on power for the last several months, since October. And to the point that I'm reading 48 Laws of Power by Robert Greene. I've revisited Kasia Urbanek's, I always say her last name improperly, forgive me if I just completely messed that up, her book, Unbound, A Women's Guide to Power. And I've been talking about power and leadership and influence in every space I'm in. In our Trauma Sensitive Business Collective, I actually added a module at the beginning on leadership and self-trust and power because it's so fundamental to running a business. And honestly, I think that power is really misunderstood. I feel like the Institute and the role that I have been playing in the Institute, that I've really upped my game over the last several months. And it has to do with increasing self-trust and increasing my level of leadership and really owning my power. And so I want to talk today about how we can step into our power and feel more empowered in a trauma-informed way, about what power is, how trauma and our past painful experiences affect how we show up from a power perspective, and how we wield our power in a way that feels really good. So I want to start off with defining power. And here's the thing. Power is a lot like money. And if you've been around and listened to the podcast for a hot minute, you might remember way back when in season 1, 50 episodes ago, 60 episodes ago, M is for money. And I feel like power is one of those words that brings forth a lot of the same potential feelings or thoughts that money does. Back in that podcast, M is for Money, spoiler alert, I talk about how money is a tool and how money is amoral. Amoral, not immoral, amoral. And what I mean by that is when we put our morals on money, that's when it becomes good or bad. And in reality, money is just a thing. It's not good or bad until it gets used by the person who's using it. And we then judge how the person used it or what the money did. And In reality, money's a tool, right? It's something that we can wield, we can use in order to exert influence. So if money's a tool, power is almost like your tool belt. And money is one of the tools that goes into the tool belt. And the tool belt is what you can use to change things. It holds all the things that you can build things with, and it holds all the things that you can destroy things with too. And sometimes it's good to destroy something, and sometimes it's bad to destroy something, and sometimes it's good to build something, and sometimes it's bad to build something. So the morals and the judgment get placed on power after the task is done, and we as humans decide, oh, was that a good thing or was it a bad thing? And the power itself, the influence itself, isn't good or bad, it just is. So a lot of times when people think of the word power, they think bad. And that's because a lot of people have used power in harmful, destructive ways. It's also not so cut and dry. It's not so black and white, because as we use our power and our influence, right, as we shift chemicals, the literal fuels that fuel our cars, that, well, okay, some may think that that's a good thing to shift from gasoline to electric powered vehicles. Some people might think that that's a bad thing because the amount of fossil fuels it requires to build an electric car, is it worth it, right? Is the intention more important than the impact? That's another question. And power really is, okay, if I influence you to do something, am I more worried about my intention when I influenced you, or am I more worried about my impact of what happens when I influence you? And from my perspective, it's really about both, and the impact is really what at the end does matter, right? What actually comes from this. And so a lot of times we want to judge people on their intentions, and sometimes we want to judge people on their impact. And it's just something to think about, right? A lot of times when it comes to other powerful people or other people influencing us, we judge them on the impact that their influence has. Yet when we judge our own influence, we judge how things went down on our intention instead of on what happened. And so power also shifts and influence the way in which we decide if influence and power is good or bad, shifts depending on our perspective. So power is amoral until we as humans decide to put morality on it. It's a tool that we can use for tremendous good. And it really boils down to how well can I influence myself, and how well can I influence other people to do what I think is the right thing to do. So when we think about trauma and our past painful experiences, the way in which we interact with our power, with our capability to influence others, and the way in which we interact with other people and how we allow or don't allow them to influence us really does depend on our perspective when it comes to power, how we define power, and how we define how powerful we are and how powerful other people are. Now, when I teach about power in our trauma courses, we talk about regulated power, aligned power, and dysregulated power. There are two main types of dysregulated power that I see, and they're on a spectrum, right? So if aligned grounded power is right in the middle of the spectrum, we have abdicated power on one side of the spectrum, and we have forced power on the other side of the spectrum. So abdicated power, when we are in a state of abdicated power, we act like a doormat. And when we are in a state of forced power, we act one of two ways. We either act like a dictator or we act like a damsel. So I'm going to walk y'all through the doormat, the dictator, and the damsel, which are all dysregulated forms of power. You like the alliteration there? I gave you all D's so you can remember it. And then we'll talk about how we wield our power in an aligned, grounded, trauma-informed way. So abdicated power, right? Abdicated power, or the doormat, is where we let other people influence us, right? We let other people influence us in ways that don't feel good for us. We also, in abdicated power, may refuse to influence other people, even when they ask for our influence. And I find that people who are disempowered, who are in this abdicated power state, right? If you think of a doormat, they let people walk all over them. Doormats also can't get up and move, right? Doormats don't make decisions. And so this abdicated power is really seeing yourself as somebody who does not have influence or should not be trusted with influence. So this is a state of learned helplessness. This is a state of all of the times that I have tried to influence things in the past, or in this specific area, whenever I've tried to influence things in the past, it's gone bad. People have gotten hurt. I've violated my own self-trust. I've violated other people's trust. I created a psychologically unsafe environment. So at least in this area of my life, if not in all areas of my life, I'm going to stay in this abdicated power state. I'm going to let other people make decisions. I'm going to trust their judgment more than mine. Even when they ask me, when they decide they want to trust me, I'm going to say, no, you shouldn't trust me. You don't want my influence. I am a bad influence. You don't want me to lead. You do not want me to influence you. And I see this happen a lot in people who are raised in homes where there's a lot of chronic childhood trauma, where they receive a lot of neglect or some sort of intrusive abuse, in which they are taught the way you survive is by yielding. The way you survive is by surrendering and letting other people do what they want. Now, hear me, please. There is nothing wrong with surrender. There is nothing wrong inherently with submission. Those are amoral too. There are times in which it makes a lot of sense to submit or to surrender to allow someone to influence you. And when we are in abdicated power state, when we are in a doormat state, we are not choosing. We are not choosing to allow someone to influence us because we think it's the right thing. We are choosing by lack of choice. It's not an active decision, okay? And I actually forgot to say, the other thing that we can see in abdicated power is you dashing away, right? The dasher. This is somebody who, when they are asked to influence others, they run away. When there is a situation in which they could step up and lead and take power, they flee. They go into flight mode. And again, this comes from the same place of, I don't feel safe leading. I don't feel safe influencing people here. So if that opportunity arises, I'm out. And by the way, if you're identifying with either of these, it's cool. A lot of people do. Disempowered states are really common in humans who've experienced trauma. And you don't have to have abdicated power in all areas of your life. Maybe you just abdicate power in your house, because maybe your spouse is more on the forced power side. And so you just go, oh, I'm just going to roll over and be a doormat. Or anytime your partner starts fighting with somebody else or trying to force their power into somebody else, you exit. You leave. So you don't have to take part in it. There are lots of reasons that we abdicate power that are birthed from self-protection, and it's not a state that feels good to live in. There's a lot of moral injury that happens in both abdicated power and forced power states. And what I mean by that is that the decisions that get made, you don't necessarily like. And you went along with them even though they didn't necessarily feel good. So that can feel very dissonant. There can be a part of you that like really is like, I'm glad that we didn't speak up. And there can be a part of you that's like, I really wish we had. So this creates a lot of dissonance inside of ourselves. It also makes it harder for us to trust ourselves because we're not honoring our needs. We're not being honest with ourselves about how we do and don't want to be influenced. And it can make it harder for other people to trust us, which just becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, on the force power side, we have the dictator and the damsel. So if the people who are abdicating their power, the dasher and the doormat, if they are unwilling to influence others and they're consistently yielding, the dictator and the damsel are doing the exact opposite. They are forcing their influence on other people who are not consenting. And these people may yield, but they're not like enthusiastically yielding. A lot of times they are in more of an abdicated power state. You can see how people get into relationships and one is in abdicated power and one is in force power, because while they are not regulated, they fit together really well. And this can be a place of trauma bonding, we see. So the dictator is probably what you imagine. This is a human who, by brute force, sometimes violence, threat of loss of limb or life, and maybe not that severe, but through threat, they get what they want. And so even if they get what they want, as a dictator, you never know if they're giving you what you want because they are consenting from this enthusiastic and informed place, or if they're doing it because they're scared of you. You never know. The damsel gets what they want through emotional manipulation. And the damsel is I think of the fawn response, the trauma response when I think of this. This is where you either act smaller and cuter and more fragile, and you sweetly ask for help and make yourself seem really, really weak and needy and that you need rescued. So sometimes people, they feel like, oh, they need rescued. Okay, well, I didn't really want to help them today, and I guess I will because, they need rescued. Except these people need rescued a lot. They need help a lot. To give you a visual, an image, this is the person that is drowning in the deep end of the pool. You jump in, nearly drown yourself trying to get them out. You get them out, they say thank you, you start to leave, and they jump back in the pool again. Right? This is the human that keeps putting themselves in situations where they need saved. You might think, well, that doesn't really sound like a powerful state, except they're getting you to do what they want in order to meet an emotional need, in order to keep you from leaving, in order to not feel abandoned, in order to feel better about the things that they did wrong, right? If you're upset and you're having an argument and you decide that you're going to walk away and this person jumps into the pool and they can't swim, you're probably not going to walk away. You're probably going to jump into the pool and try to help them. And that gets old quick, right? So these force power states are using manipulation and influence without consent or without enthusiastic consent. And oftentimes, the humans who are yielding to you, if you are in a forced power state, are doing so not from a place of wanting to, and also they oftentimes don't have all the details. They don't understand the consequences or the impact that's going to come from helping you, and the fact that they're going to have to help you more and more and more. And so they agree to help you one time, not realizing that this is going to create a pattern. So how do we wield our power? How do we use our influence in a more aligned, regulated, grounded, trauma-informed way? I've hinted to this a little bit. What I think is necessary for influence to be trauma-informed to feel safe and to really feel good for the humans involved is 4 things. The first thing is enthusiastic consent. Now, when I say enthusiastic consent, I don't mean that this person is hopping up and down saying yes. And they're so excited and like they're not scared, they're not like hesitant, they're not any of that. When I say enthusiastic consent, what I mean is this person, even though they know that what they're about to do might feel uncomfortable, they're fully on board with doing it. Even if they're scared, even if they know it's going to hurt, even if they're like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? They're still in. They're fully in. And I share this because a lot of times with coaching, with my clients, we'll be coaching and I'm like, I'm going to say a thing and it's probably not going to feel good. And I think it's the thing you need to hear. Can I you down? And they're like, yeah. Right? That's enthusiastic consent, even though it's not comfortable. So somebody doesn't have to feel 100% comfortable with what they're consenting to in order to be fully enthusiastic about it. The second piece is informed consent. And informed consent basically means that you give them as much information as you know about the potential impact of them consenting, of them deciding that you're going to influence them. So an example I like to give is this. A lot of times I have humans, like they'll join our business collective, our trauma sensitive business collective that we open every quarter. And when people join, one of the things that they often want as a return on investment is growth in their business. And what I will say to people is this, I'll say, look, I want your business to just grow and expand in such a beautiful way while you're in here. And sometimes that's not what happens. So what I can tell you is this. My commitment from a outcome perspective is you're going to get what you need and you're going to feel satisfied that you got what you needed in this container. I can't promise, and I don't promise, that you're going to get what you wanted to get out of this at the beginning, because sometimes our desires shift. Sometimes life throws us curveballs, and I just need you to understand before you say yes to coming in here that there are no guarantees that you're going to grow your business. And most humans actually really appreciate that. They appreciate the fact that I'm saying, hey, like, absolutely you can come in here and you'll grow it. It'll be great. I'm being honest with them. And I'm honest with them that it might not always be comfortable. I'm honest with them that, you know, while we strive to create the safest space possible, it's not always going to feel safe. I'm honest with them about all of that. I give them as much information as I have up front, and I allow them to ask questions. I welcome questions so that they can get all the information they need prior to saying yes. And they get to continue consenting as things progress, right? One of the things that we teach our kiddos, and one of the things that I really love that we're starting to teach in the intimacy space, you get to get consent. You both want to consent. Anyone who's participating in a sexual encounter or an intimate encounter should consent at each step. And a lot of people are like, oh, doesn't that take you out of the mood? Doesn't that make it hard? No, right? Especially when you are getting to know somebody. Just because they said yes to A doesn't mean they said yes to B. Just because they said yes last time doesn't mean they're a yes this time. Just because they seem really excited doesn't mean that they're a yes. And at some point in the relationship, what might happen is that you both agree to be yeses because you have established safety and trust. Your yeses for everything unless you say no, right? That's where my husband and I are at. We know what we like. We know what we don't like. We are yeses to everything until one of us says no. And every now and then we have conversations about, hey, what are your boundaries? What's been feeling good for you lately? We have those conversations to ensure that the consent remains enthusiastic. And a lot of times we have those conversations before any moments of intimacy because it's really helpful to make sure that we're on the same page, that we understand what that yes means today versus yesterday. The third piece is a mutually beneficial approach to influencing someone. If the impact of my influence isn't going to feel good for both of us, then why are we doing it? If the impact of my influencing you does not bring both of us what we want, why do it? This is a really novel thing for a lot of people to think, oh, wow, I can always ensure that we're both on board with this, that this feels like it's going to have a mutually beneficial outcome for both of us. And even if it doesn't, we're still both cool with it. We both have enthusiastically and informedly consented. But this mutually beneficial approach is like, when I teach this to business owners, they're like, wait, what? When I teach this to people who are, in partnerships and relationships, and I'm like, you two are trying to figure out how you each get 50% instead of figuring out how you each walk away feeling like you both got 100%. And those are two very different perspectives. If you are arguing over who gets more, because the assumption is mine plus yours adds up to 100%, instead of going, no, how do we both try to get 100% here? Because that's possible. Or how do we both try to get as close to 100% as possible, right? That really shifts the way that we can influence people. Because if they know that we care, again, going back to trust, if they know that we care about them, they know that we're being honest about what we want and what we are ensuring that they get, why wouldn't they want to let us influence them? Or why wouldn't they want to influence us, knowing that they can trust that we'll tell them if something doesn't feel good or if we need more information? And then the fourth piece is understanding that we have power in every choice we make. And this is an oofy one. This is an oofy one, y'all. You have power. You have influence in every single scenario you encounter in your life until the moment you die. There's a famous quote, and I honestly meant to look up who said it before. And essentially, the crux of the message is this: you cannot control me unless you kill me. Because I have influence over my own mind until you take that away from me by ensuring I no longer exist. I get to choose how I think about things. I get to choose if I let you influence my thoughts up until that very last moment. And I remember when I first heard this, I had a really hard time with it. Because I started thinking of all these scenarios in which somebody could hurt you or harm you or use their power to really do damage. And I realized people can do whatever they want to me, and I still have a choice in how I respond to that. When I started looking at my ability to influence myself and how I thought and how I showed up, that is when the game changed. Recognizing now that I am the only human in the world who has complete control over how I see things, how I make meaning out of things, how I respond to things. People can influence the heck out of me, or try, and I still have a choice. And I have a choice in every moment to decide how I'm going to use my influence externally towards other people as well. And I don't know about y'all. I don't know if it hits you the same way. But that perspective shift was so huge for me. And it's really changed how I run my business. It's changed how I have approached trauma work. It's changed how I parent. It's changed how I am in relationship with my husband, with all of my friends, family. knowing that I get to decide if I consent to things. I get to decide if somebody influences me or not. And if somebody impacts me negatively with their influence, I get to decide how I respond to that. Here's the other piece about power and influence. A lot of humans that I know are listening to this podcast are scared to wield their power. They're scared to step into this aligned, grounded power place because they are afraid that they are going to negatively impact other humans. And so the thing that I want y'all to remember is this. Just because I negatively impact somebody else, it doesn't mean that I can't then choose something that cleans that up or helps fix it. It doesn't even necessarily mean that that was something bad or wrong. Sometimes you're going to make choices that other people perceive as negative. Sometimes you are going to influence other people in ways that they don't appreciate. And that doesn't necessarily mean that that choice was wrong for you. It doesn't mean that you wielding your power in that manner was a mistake. And so being able to trust yourself, this is why power comes last and trust came first. Being able to trust yourself and lead yourself, make decisions for yourself is going to be really crucial. And this came up for me in launching our latest program, Thought Leader, because I realized that on my next steps of my journey, I'm really stepping into how can I influence humans on a larger scale? How can I lead more people? How can I expand my impact? And that felt really, really, really scary, right? I'm sure there's people who've listened to this podcast who've hated it. I'm sure that there are people out there who I know there are people out there who really don't like me or what I have to say as a human. I know there are people who fundamentally agree with my trauma-informed approach. I know that there are people out there that are like, I don't want Lee's influence. And they have that choice. And that choice has nothing to do with me. Because I've already ensured that the things I'm saying, the way in which I'm showing up, the trust level that I have for myself is at a place where I'm not going to question if somebody else doesn't like my influence. And so if that is a place that you really feel scary for you, and you also want to influence other people with your thoughts, with your ideas, then I really want to invite you into Thought Leader with us. You just started yesterday. You have not missed a thing. And I want to invite you in there because I want to show you the behind the scenes of how I do this work for myself, the mindset that I do to be able to grow in my influence and my reach, the actual ways in which I am reaching out to places where I can share my thought leadership, how I approach public speaking, about the book that I'm writing, about how I go on podcasts, all of these things. I'm going to be sharing those in the group. And so I want to invite you in. Even if you're listening to this in a month from now, we're going till the end of June. So hop in. It's $55. It's one of the most inexpensive things that I have offered in a really long time. And the reasoning behind that is I really think that this is important. I think that there are a lot of humans in our audience that, due to past painful experiences, are sitting either in an abdicated power state or a forced power state, and people can't hear their message, either because they're not sharing it or because the way in which they're sharing it feels non-consensual and forced. So if you identify with either of those, join us in Thought Leader, because I want to help you get to more of that grounded, aligned, trauma-informed power state so that people can hear you and people can shift their own thinking based on what you share with them. So I hope you'll join us in there. I'm so excited for it to start. If you have any questions, you can email us. The link to Thought Leader will be in the show notes below. And I think I just want to end this with inviting you to think about where you can step into your power, where you can own your power and own the fact that you have a lot of influence in just the tiniest of ways. What is one small thing that you could do that would, if you kept making small moves like that, influence your world massively? So just invitation to think about that and then to make the move. And if you want to share the move with us, I'd love to hear from you. Send us an email or DM me on Facebook and tell me the move you made, the power move you made, because I'd love to hear it. I love you all. I hope you have a fabulous week, and I will see you next episode. Thank you so much for listening to today's episode. Invitation to head to our show notes to check out the offers and connections we mentioned, or you can just head straight over to institutefortrauma.com and hop in our email list so that you never miss any of the cool things that we're doing over at the Institute. Invitation to be well and to take care of yourself this week, and we'll see you next time.